Florida, a state park somewhere near Jacksonville. Our first look. See this road? We're at the Olustee Civil War battlefield, and we came in here and it doesn't look like there's much going on. We rode all the way down this road that's paved underneath, it looks like, but hasn't been traveled in quite some time, and came to a gate, and there was a couple in a camper. I spoke to them a little bit, and I said, "Excuse me, do you know how to see this place?" And he said, "Bugger if I know," because he was like straight up British or European, whoever says bugger. And
I think it's British, and it's like not a nice word, but
I think it's not a nice word. But anyway, he said, "Bug it if I know." And we stood there and talked for a bit, and he's on one side of the fence and we're on the other, and neither can get to the other side because there's a lock.
But they didn't want us up on them because they were distancing. They're in the middle of nowhere, and Brian's like, "Hi."
I kept, I don't know, I was like 12 feet away from it. But yeah, so we're going, now we did see the monument at the beginning of this, so.
There was a monument in a parking lot and like a little visitor center, but I was thinking there was a trail. And then Brian and I come out here and he's like, "Well, I saw a sign for a scenic walk." And I'm like, "Well, you didn't say that to me." So.
Honestly,
I feel like
I
our
thought she
communication
saw
could
it.
be better, like way better.
So we drove back to the front as there was little down that road. And there's the visitor center. So
Okay, let's park here.
yeah, we're just gonna pull up in here. By the way, the couple that I ran into were really nice. And if you ever see this video, it was very nice to meet you. And hope you had a fantastic time down here. So this place reminds me a lot of the Woodmanston plantation down in Georgia, like what, or yeah, way in South Georgia, or somewhere between here and Savannah, back in the old roadside stop days. And but this visitor center, as you can see, there's not a lot going on.
The museum is closed.
They do have maps. But you should know about rabies, social distancing, yada yada. Do not destroy your American heritage. Good words. Everything's closed. So you know how really long the Shiloh Battlefield series was? Yeah, this is not going to be that. They do have plans for the future.
Yeah, it looks great. I don't see a date on here though.
Who knows when this will happen?
They do have reenactments on the anniversary of the battle.
It's a very pretty place. Very wild. So there's some waysides over there. You
Yeah,
wanna
but I
go?
think we gotta do it from the beginning.
Behind the building is placed by the United Daughters of the Confederacy, Florida Division, in memory of Brigadier General Joseph Finnegan, commander of District of Middle and East Florida. So well did he perform his part that a signal victory over the Federals was won in the Battle of the Olustee.
Yes, this is a Confederate victory. The Union came down to sort of, they wanted to take over and sort of secure Florida, but the battle didn't go that well and they just gave up, and they gave up on Florida.
Wow. Here was fought on February the 20th, 1864, the Battle of Ocean Pond under the immediate command of General Alfred Holt Colquitt, hero of Olustee. This decisive engagement prevented a Sherman-like invasion of Georgia from the south. Erected April 20th, 1936 by the Alfred Holt Colquitt Chapter, United Daughters of the Confederacy, Georgia Division. And this. Magnificent.
In February 1864, the commander of the Department of the South, Major General Quincy A. Gilmore, launched an expedition into Florida. So the battle was to secure Union enclaves, disrupt rebel supply routes, and recruit black soldiers. Brigadier General Truman Seymour and his 5,000 troops moved deep into the state. He met little resistance until February 20th as he approached Brigadier General Joseph Finnegan's 5,000 Confederates entrenched near Olustee. The battle raged for 4 hours. And as Finnegan committed the last of his reserves, Seymour ordered a withdrawal, using a fresh brigade to cover the Union retreat. 3 regiments of U.S. colored troops took part in the battle, including the now famous 54th Massachusetts.
Wow.
The battle ended with 2,807 casualties and the retreat of the Union troops to Jacksonville until the war's end just 14 months later.
Wow.
Scenes from Civil War movies, including the 1989 movie Glory, have been filmed during the reenactments.
Wow.
So,
wow, that is cool.
in 1909, the Florida legislature acquired 3 acres to build a memorial to commemorate the event. In 1912, when many living Civil War veterans still attended the reunions, the battlefield became the state's first historic site. In February of each year, a reenactment of the battle occurs, and a Civil War expo takes place late in summer.
Cool. So you are looking at Florida's first historic site. To the men who fought and triumphed here in defense of their homes and firesides, this monument is erected by the United Daughters of the Confederacy, aided by the state of Florida, in commemoration of their devotion to the cause of liberty and state sovereignty.
Look at the Spanish moss.
I know, it's beautiful. It's late November and it's shirt sleeve weather. I love Florida.
November 26th,
November 26th.
2020.
The Battle of Olustee was fought on this ground, February the 20th, 1864, between 5,000 Confederate troops commanded by General Joseph E. Finnegan and 6,000 Federal troops under General Truman Seymour. The Federals were defeated with a loss of 2,000 men. The Confederate loss was less than 1,000.
Look at the detail on this monument. There's stone. It looks like a little castle. There's a Confederate battle flag sort of etched in there.
This is one of the best monuments I have ever seen.
It looks like a little mini, fort, I guess.
Right down here, February 20th, 1994, the 130th anniversary of the battle. 1st Florida Infantry Battalion, 2nd Florida Infantry Battalion, 6th Florida Infantry Battalion, Madison Conscripts, 2nd Florida Cavalry, 5th Florida Cavalry Battalion, 1st Georgia Regulars, 6th Georgia Infantry, 19th Georgia Infantry, 23rd Georgia Infantry, 27th Georgia Infantry, 28th Georgia Infantry, 32nd Georgia Infantry, 64th Georgia Infantry, 4th Georgia Cavalry, 28th Georgia Artillery, I'm a little slow, 28th Georgia Artillery Battalion, Chatham Artillery, Girard's Battery. This is fantastic. Look at the elegance of this thing. This is an intricate monument. It stands stately in the Florida sun, custodian of the battle's history. Such a beautiful piece of work.
So there's some ant species here where the anthills look like old cement, see, or old tarmac. So you're
Ooh.
like, oh, there used to be something here. And you step in it and it's soft and it's filled with ants.
Wow.
But doesn't it look sort of like
Could
concrete?
be. Okay, so there are cannons.
These cannons are olive green. Remember we talked about how in Horseshoe Bend the cannons were that pale blue
Yes.
as a tribute to
France.
France. And by the Civil War, the cannons are painted olive green. Here's a good example. So we gotta follow the battle lines on the...
I absolutely love the Spanish moss that adorns the trees, creating a memorable backdrop for your stroll through Olustee. There's this fire tower you cannot climb.
This was a civilian conservation corps project. You could see fires from it.
Oh. During the Great Depression, President Roosevelt approved a plan to recruit thousands of unemployed young men to a civilian conservation corps, the CCC. From 1933 to 1942, the CCC employed over 3 million Americans. They built and repaired roads, planted trees, fought forest fires, constructed bridges, and worked on a variety of other projects throughout North Florida. The fire lookout in front of you is named Olustee Tower and was manned by CCC enrollees, along with East Tower, West Tower, and a series of smaller lookout poles. They served as a network of observation stations for directional detection of forest fires throughout the history of the Osceola National Forest. There's some waysides up there.
I was promised a 1-mile walking trail.
Is this the 1 mile walking trail? Okay, so we walked over here. I think this is where we're supposed to be. We finally come to the main stage of battle, the 1 mile loop where the battle raged.
Okay. Oh, I love this. All right, so we're here.
Okay.
There's a fire tower. There is the cemetery. So Brian did see that cemetery. There's a Union monument, which we have not seen. But we've seen the Confederate monument and the museum. The 54th Mass was here. 8th U.S. 7th Connecticut. 1st Florida Cavalry.
Yeah, they were all out here and all that. That's where this was.
Yeah, so you can kind of see how it's going. You've got infantry and cavalry. I don't see a lot of artillery. We did see some over here. So maybe that was there. So what we want to do is the 1 mile loop.
The morning of February 20th, 1864, dawned clear and cool. The Union Army, commanded by Brigadier General Truman Seymour, set his force in motion at 6 a.m. Or you can do that.
In the early 1860s, the effects of war were everyday realities in the lives of people both north and south. No one escaped the hardships of war. Soldiers were husbands, fathers, sons, and brothers. Wives became widows, and children were orphaned. The pain of lost loved ones, homes, fortunes, hopes, and dreams loomed like a black cloud over the heads of all Americans. Like many other states, the ravages of war reached Florida, even an out-of-the-way place like Olustee.
Olustee.
In 1861, Florida had withdrawn from the Union and joined the ranks of the Confederacy. Florida this time was not considered to be important to the North or the South because it was underpopulated, had no industry, and was isolated from the rest of the Confederacy. For 3 years, the Civil War raged in a bitterly divided nation. The ragged and hungry Confederate forces on the northern fronts endured winter's biting cold, with most supplies from the western states cut off and the southern seaports blockaded. Many commonplace items became unavailable at any price. Even in the wealthy households, common articles of food vanished from kitchens and tables. By 1864, the Confederate States were relying heavily on Florida's farmers to furnish beef, pork, beans, and potatoes to sustain its military forces. The ranges in Central and South Florida provided tens of thousands of cattle, desperately needed by the main Confederate armies. To preserve the meat and leather, the Confederates needed salt. Extensive salt works were built along Florida's coast, where seawater was boiled down to produce salt. Florida became just as important to the North at this time because it was an election year. President Lincoln was campaigning for re-election. Lincoln and others felt a victory in Florida would assure him another term in office. In addition to the political objectives, there were military concerns that played a role in the decision for the Union to occupy East Florida. In a letter dated January 31st, 1864, Major General Quincy Gilmore said his objectives were,
first, to procure an outlet for cotton, lumber, timber, turpentine, and other products of the state. Second, to cut off one of the enemy's sources of commissary supplies. And third, to obtain recruits for my colored regiments.
the North's attempt to restore Florida to the Union and to cut off these vital supplies from the Confederate States began here on the afternoon of February 20th, 1864. It became known as the Battle of Olustee.
Brigadier General Truman Seymour of the Union side was very handsome.
There he is, ladies. We make our way to the start of the loop. At 8 o'clock in the morning on the 20th instant, we were informed that the Yankees were advancing. Part of the brigade was immediately ordered to some rifle pits hastily constructed near at hand. The remainder forming line of battle in open field. In this position, we patiently waited the coming of the foe for an hour, when our general, who is a fair man, concluded to meet halfway.
Marching west, the Union forces left Barber's Plantation at 6 a.m., expecting to defeat the Confederates 32 miles away in Lake City. If successful, the Union then planned to cut off railroad communications between the east and west Florida by destroying the railroad bridge over the Suwannee River. Little did they know that they would never make it that far. By early afternoon, the Union cavalry had driven the Confederate cavalry westward for several miles. As the Union neared the railroad station at Olustee, Confederate resistance grew stronger, and here is where the bloody 4-hour battle began. And this is interesting because it is cavalry, so that's probably makes it a very exciting reenactment if you get the troops and the horses.
Yeah, because at Shiloh, the cavalry couldn't do anything.
Mm-hmm. This is a very nice trail.
It is. Look at
mossy.
Soft, mossy ground. Very nice.
And it is 4:16. I do have an alarm set for 4:56. So.
Okay. We were pushing against time as it closed at 5. This walkway circles this marshy looking area out here. Looks like it must be an absolute bird sanctuary. Wildlife. The trail has gone from moss to grass with some moss mixed in.
Some pine needles.
Pine needles. In this world, it is best to be sure that you are right. Then go ahead. I am sure that we are in the right and that God is on our side. Follow me today, my men, and I will lead you to the enemy. Remember, the honor of Georgia rests with you. Colonel Barrow of the 64th Georgia, Colonel Barrow had barely spoken these words when a Yankee bullet pierced his heart, and he died without a struggle.
Oh. When the two armies met in force, the Union troops were positioned between two swamps, one stopping their advance and the other blocking their retreat. They could see for long distances, and there was very little cover in which to hide. To the north was an old cleared field where the fighting would be severe. No one anticipated that Olustee would become a major battle. Neither side knew much about the battleground or their opponent, but each continued to send troops forward. Both sides were almost evenly matched, and at this point it was anyone's victory.
Wow.
You can see the swamp.
Oh,
there.
yeah.
Yeah.
The guy's back up in there.
And we can see it as we... It's like
Yeah.
swampy on the sides.
Even without the history, it's a very pleasant walk. Now we're at Sand.
As we advanced, the enemy retired, keeping just in sight. Whenever we could get near enough to stand any chance of doing execution, we would blaze away at them, and they returned the fire in a way that showed they were good marksmen, for their shots came plenty near enough, although none of us were hit. Letter to his wife from Milton M. Woodford, 7th Connecticut.
Oh, this is an unidentified soldier.
Around 2 p.m., Union troops reached a railroad crossing east of Olustee. Here they faced increased resistance from the advancing Confederate troops. The 7th Connecticut opened up with heavy fire from their Spencer repeating rifles, catching the 64th Georgia off guard, killing all of their regiment's field officers. General Colquitt's reinforcements arrived just in time to keep the 64th from being cut down. The 7th Connecticut advanced farther than their flanks and soon found themselves in a crossfire. When their ammunition ran low, they withdrew several hundred yards to the rear. Here, the Union advance was finally halted.
I know why people live in Florida. It's Thanksgiving Day and it's warm. Like springtime warm. I'm like, yeah, I can do this. Pure Florida, my friends. Endless field of these palms. Or palmettos or whatever those are. You just feel like you're in the middle of nowhere out here.
It's very peaceful and it's so beautiful.
It's
really
peaceful as battlefields always are. What you see is the antithesis of the reason for its importance. Here they stood for 2 hours, under one of the most terrible fires I've ever witnessed. And here, on this field of Olustee, was decided whether the colored man had the courage to stand without shelter and risk the dangers of the battlefield. And when I tell you that they stood with a fire in front on their flanks, without flinching, I have no doubt as to the verdict of every man who has gratitude for the defenders of his country, white or black. 8th U.S. Colonel Regimental Surgeon.
By 3 p.m., the 7th New Hampshire deployed on the Union right flank, battling heavy fire from the Confederates. The regiment had earlier been ordered to exchange their Spencer repeating rifles for old defective muskets, many of which did not even fire. Colonel Hawley, in leading the 7th New Hampshire, either gave a wrong command or his command was misunderstood. The confusion caused the 7th to scatter and drift to the rear. The 8th U.S. colored troops, with no battle experience and little training, were deployed on the Union left flank. They had less than 1 month's service and had never practiced firing their weapons. They were severely mauled at a railroad crossing east of Olustee. Of the 575 men in this troop, 310 were killed or wounded.
Wow. The battle rages. The infantry fighting was magnificent. Nothing could withstand it. The enemy held on for a time, but finally gave way, and we advanced some 200 yards. Here the enemy again resisted stubbornly. Captain Wheaton, Confederate Historical Sketch, Chatham Artillery, 1887.
Around 3 p.m., Colonel Harrison arrived with Confederate reinforcements and General Colquitt ordered the troops to advance. Colonel Barton's brigade for the north was soon subjected to concentrated fire in the area recently vacated by the 7th New Hampshire. The continuous roar of battle lasted another 3 hours without a pause. Grape and canister swept by with hideous music, and shell after shell tore through our ranks and burst amid heaps of our wounded heroes. The 115th New York swept forward in the face of a galling fire through reeds higher than our heads, over logs and fences, until the hateful columns of Southern gray were plainly visible. James H. Clark, The Iron-Hearted Regiment, 115th New York, 1865.
Man, it's like otherworldly in there. Bloody massacre. Our companies were enduring an increased musketry fire from front and flank. Sharpshooters were observed perched in the trees, but a few volleys brought them down. We were sustaining casualties every moment, but most of the missiles passed overhead. Louis F. Emilio, History of the 54th Massachusetts.
At this point in the battle, the Union had 5 cannons captured, and nearly every other cannon was rendered useless. The horses and men were nearly all killed or wounded, and it was the greatest slaughter among artillery known in the history of this war.
Wow.
During the engagement, a train of cars arrived bringing reinforcements for the Confederates. General Colquitt had a large cannon mounted on a railroad flat car, which shot a large shell every 5 minutes, devastating the Union troops. Oh, look, here's a photo. Here's like a sketch.
Oh, yeah.
It's like on a railroad car. They've got the cannon.
James H. Clark, The Iron-Hearted Regiment, 115th New York, 1865. As we walk through here, I notice you can't even see the fire tower from where we are. Huh.
Claiming to be the last to leave the field, the 54th Massachusetts heard their Lieutenant Colonel Hooper say, "Well, boys, we must hold this line. We must fix bayonets and stay in our tracks." The men shouted, "We can do it." They gathered all the cartridges from the field they could. And as the enemy advanced, the men would cheer so that the rebels thought it was a trap and fell back. After some time, our men were withdrawn a little way, and a line formed there. As the army retreated, our regiment fell back, taking different positions until off the field. Major John W. M. Appleton, 54th Massachusetts. About the time the North fell, the day was lost. The 54th Massachusetts and the 1st North Carolina U.S. Colored advanced, staggering the enemy for a moment. Around 5 p.m., the fire slackened on both sides as soldiers were running out of ammunition. The men searched the pockets of their fallen comrades, desperate for ammunition. New supplies of ammunition arrived for Confederates. The entire line moved forward, led by the 27th Georgia, driving the Union forces from their positions. The battle waged furiously all along the line, and the slaughter was terrible, but each man was determined to give his all. And then here's, in the sketch, there's a soldier going in the guy's pocket, you know, his little cartridge bag to get ammo. And that was something that was kind of chilling in Shiloh when they gave a demonstration. Somebody asked at the question and answer period, you know, they can only carry so much. And the guide was like, well, you know, once you start fighting, you get more ammo. And it was implied that you were getting it from
The dead.
the dead.
Olustee is a really good park. Good job, Florida, on this one. This is awesome.
I grew fainter and fainter. In this state, 2 young Confederate soldiers came to me, and by holding a lighted match to my face, they recognized me as one of the 48th Regiment. At last, one of them said to the other, "I would like to make the Yank a fire. Look how he is shivering. He will not stand the frost tonight." So they kindled me a blazing fire, which received my benumbed limbs. Then one of them unbuckled his blanket, covering me with it, brought me some water. Then bidding me goodbye, they left me not however, till the younger of them had given me a plug of good tobacco. Sergeant Lang, 48th New York.
Civility even in war. Honor.
Of that. After 3 hours of fighting, every regiment excepting the 115th New York had been compelled to leave the field. Our boys occupied precisely the same position which they did at the opening of the battle. They stood battling over the bodies of their fallen comrades. At last the shades of night covered the field of blood, and we were then ordered to the rear. After giving 3 ringing cheers of defiance to the rebels, the regiment slowly and sadly dragged themselves away. Over one half were killed and wounded, and the remainder were black with powder and the smoke of battle and could hardly move. James H. Clark, the Iron-Hearted Regiment, 115th New York, 1865.
All the battles of the Civil War were tragic on so many levels.
It's nice they left that guy a blanket.
Yeah. So a recap, there's a monument, there's a walking tour with waysides, and they do have reenactments. Currently, as of Thanksgiving Day 2020, the visitor center is not open. I don't know if they just haven't finished it or if it's because of COVID or both.
It's closed because of COVID right now. The new one isn't built yet. There's just a visionary billboard with no date on it.
That.
But they wouldn't be open today anyway because it's Thanksgiving. They're closed Thanksgiving and Christmas. Or the Welcome Center is closed on those holidays. But I think this is open 365 days a year if you want to do what we're doing.
But it closes at 5, and it's not too far from 5 now.
And we don't know where the car is or anything.
It's right over there.
Oh, I would have had a drama, but Marian's like, no, it's right there.
It just came into view. Up until 5 steps earlier, I did not know where the car was.
I went over the battleground this morning on my way to camp, and never in my life have I seen such a distressing sight. Some men with their legs carried off, others with their brains out and mangled in every conceivable way, and then our men commenced stripping them of their clothing and left their bodies naked. I never want to see another battle or go on the field again after it is over. Winston Stevens, 2nd Florida Cavalry. Colquitt's brigade gradually advanced until they were nearly on the enemy's left flank. The Yankees broke and fled, and the rebels knew they had won. The whole line moving as directed, the enemy gave way in confusion. We continued the pursuit for several miles when night put an end to the conflict. Brigadier General Alfred Colquitt. Before the day had ended, the casualties were staggering. The Union suffered 1,861 killed, wounded, and missing. The Confederates' casualties totaled 946. The Olustee defeat ended Union efforts to organize a loyal Florida government in time for the 1864 election. The Confederates won the Battle of Olustee, but would eventually lose the Civil War. I just thought that last wayside was interesting because he talked about going on the battlefield after it was over. There's a book called, I believe it's called The Aftermath of Battle, and it's about people who went to Gettysburg after that battle. So there were like sightseers and looters and all kinds of like really like crazy things happening, like just normal people going out there and seeing all that terrible damage and like helping themselves to whatever they could find. It was really kind of a depressing account. But that one we just read where that guy was like, I never want to see a battlefield after it's over, because that's just when it's all quiet and you see whatever remains.
And in the cemetery. To the memory of the officers and soldiers of the United States Army who fell in the Battle of Olustee, January 20th, 1864. This memorial replaces the original wooden one erected on this site, May 1866. Sergeant Major W. David Rose, 7th Florida, Company B, CSA. That is too far gone. Wait a minute. In the memory of Roger Whale, late Captain, 7th Connecticut Volunteers Company G. ADJ, I'm not sure what that means, Guy Arnold, Barton's Brigade, lest we forget. May the living profit by the example of the dead. Participating units: Colonel G.V. Henry, CMD, 40th Massachusetts Mounted Infantry. Battery B, 1st U.S. Horse Artillery. Captain J. Hamilton, CMD, Commander. Battery E, 3rd U.S. Artillery. Battery M, 1st U.S. Artillery. Battery C, 3rd Rhode Island Artillery. It is important to visit sites like these. Only by walking the grounds can you really get a sense of place for what these people experienced, if only a shadow. We must learn and keep the nuances of our history, like those of Olustee.